from Wikipedia Free Encyclopedia. This article is about armored fighting vehicles. For other meanings, see tank disambiguation. A tank is a tracked armored combat vehicle, armored fighting vehicle, designed primarily to destroy enemy ground forces by direct fire. A modern main battle tank, MBT, is distinguished by its high-level firepower, mobility, and armor protection relative to other vehicles of its era. It can cross comparatively rough terrain at high speeds, but is fuel, maintenance, and ammunition hungry and is logistically demanding. It has the heaviest armor of any vehicle on the battlefield and carries what is intended to be an effective anti-tank weapon. It is among the most versatile and fearsome weapons on the battlefield, valued for its shock action against other troops, its ability to engage a wide variety of ground targets, and high survivability. If not properly protected, tanks can be vulnerable from weapons such as aircraft strikes, mines, and artillery, as well as being swamped by infantry. They are usually employed as part of combined arms warfare, supported by infantry and engineers, other fighting vehicles, artillery, and aircraft. Tanks were first used in World War I to break the deadlock of the trenches, and they evolved to take the role of cavalry on the battlefield. The name tank first arose in British factories making the casings of the first battle tanks. The workmen were given the impression they were constructing tracked water containers for the British Army, hence keeping the production of a fighting vehicle in secret. Tanks have subsequently undergone many generations of design evolution. Many of their traits have matured. However, there is an ongoing arms race between tank armor and anti-tank weapon systems, and between opposing tank designs, causing a continual need for upgrading. History. Main article, History of the Tank. World War I, the first tanks. Having already seen armored Rolls-Royce cars used in 1914, and aware of schemes to create a tracked fighting vehicle, First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill sponsored the Landships Committee to oversee development of this new weapon. The first successful prototype tank was tested for the British Army on September 6, 1915. Although initially termed land ships by the Admiralty, the initial vehicles were colloquially referred to as water carriers, later shortened to tank to preserve secrecy. The word tank was used to give the workers the impression they were constructing tracked water containers for the British Army in Mesopotamia, and was made official on December 24, 1915. The first tank became operational when Captain H.W. Mortimer of the Royal Navy took a Mark I into action at Delville Wood during the Battle of the Somme on September 15, 1916. The French developed the Schneider CA-1 working from Holt Caterpillar tractors, and first used it on April 16, 1917. The first successful use of massed tanks in combat occurred at the Battle of Cambrai on November 20, 1917. The tank would eventually make trench warfare obsolete, and the thousands of tanks fielded by French and British forces made a significant contribution to the war. Initial results with tanks were mixed, with problems in reliability causing considerable attrition rates when getting the tanks into combat and on the move. This forced the development of tanks such as the Mark IV, which rhomboid shape could navigate large obstacles, especially long trenches, more easily than many modern AFVs. Allied tanks continued to evolve during the war, while Germany mostly fielded a small number of captured tanks, and only made 20 of their native design, the A7V. 1920s to the end of Second World War. With the tank concept now established, several nations designed and built tanks between the two world wars. The British designs were the most advanced, due largely to their successes in World War I, the state of the other European powers, France and Germany, and the detachment of the USA. There was thought put into tank-against-tank combat, but the focus was on powerful anti-tank guns and similar weapons, including dedicated anti-tank vehicles. This was put to its fullest expression in the United States, where tanks were expected to run away from enemy armor and let dedicated tank destroyer units deal with them. In practice, these concepts soon proved dangerous, As the amount of armor on the battlefield increased, the chance of running into a tank grew to the point where every vehicle had to be an effective anti-tank vehicle as well. This led to a rapid up-armoring and up-gunning of almost all tank designs. Tank shape, previously guided purely by considerations of obstacle clearance, now became a trade-off, with a low profile desirable for stealth and stability. World War II saw a series of advances in tank design. Germany, for example, initially fielded lightly armored and lightly armed tanks, such as the Panzer I, which was originally intended for training use only. These fast-moving tanks and other armored vehicles were a critical element of the German Blitzkrieg. However, they fared poorly in direct combat with British tanks and suffered severely against the Soviet T-34, which was superior in armor and weaponry. By the end of the war, all forces had dramatically increased their firepower and armor. For instance, the PZ Panther I had only 2 machine guns, and the PZ-4, the heaviest early war German design, had a light 75mm design and weighed under 20 tons. By the end of the war, the standard German medium tank, the Panther, mounted a powerful 75mm gun and weighed 45 tons. By this time, all tanks were equipped with radios, vastly improving the direction of units. Tank chassis were adapted to a wide range of military jobs, including mine clearance and engineering tasks. Some of these vehicles remain as other classes of armored fighting vehicle. All major combatant powers also developed tank destroyers and assault guns, armored vehicles carrying large caliber guns, but often without turrets. Turrets, which were not previously a universal feature on tanks, were recognized as the way forward. It was appreciated that if the tank's gun was to be used to engage armored targets, then it needed to be as large and powerful as possible, making having one large gun with an all-round field of fire vital. Multiple turreted vehicles, e.g. the Russian T-35, slowly died out during World War II, but never entirely disappeared. Most tanks retained at least one hull machine gun. Even post-war, the M60 MBT had a smaller secondary turret for the commander's cupola. Cold War and beyond. After World War II, tank development proceeded largely as it had been, with improvements to both the medium and heavy classes. Light tanks were now limited to the reconnaissance role and, in U.S. use, airborne support as well. However, the weight limitations of air transport made a practical light tank almost impossible to build, and this class gradually disappeared over time. In the 1950s, improvements in armor and engines led to a new medium class with the same sort of battlefield performance as the previous generation of heavy tanks. As a result of heavy anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs, the focus in development shifted away from just the tank size to the technologies within it. The long range of ATGM made it useless to concentrate resources into fewer heavy tanks because they could no longer perform in the standoff role, the one thing they were really useful for. So rather than just producing tanks with much thicker armor, radically more effective armor was implemented. Gun technology remained remarkably similar even to World War I-era gun technology, with most tanks in service still being manually loaded, but with big advances in shell effectiveness. The result was the concept of the main battle tank, a technologically superior design that would make up the vast majority of the armored forces and be used like the last generation of medium and cruiser tanks. They had the armor to withstand hits from other tanks, but were just as vulnerable as ever to threats like aircraft, mines, and artillery fire. They focused performance on the anti-tank role and speed instead of infantry support. One of the most popular of these designs was the British Centurion with the 105mm L7 gun. The continued need for vehicles that could carry and protect infantry resulted in the development and use of combination vehicles, cavalry fighting vehicles, and infantry fighting vehicles, CFVs and IFVs, such as the M2 Bradley, which combines the roles of a light tank and an APC. Although the basic roles and traits of tanks were almost all developed by the end of World War I, the performance of 21st century counterparts had increased by an order of magnitude. They had been refined dramatically in response to continually changing threats and requirements, especially the threat of other tanks. The advancing capabilities of tanks have been balanced by developments of other tanks and by continuous development of anti-tank weapons. Design. The three principles of armored warfare, which therefore govern tank design, are firepower, maneuverability, and protection, which all lead to the shock action the tank will be able to deliver.